The hallucinogenic drugs of the late 60s and early 70s created a base for the expansion of psychedelic folk. Psychedelic music encompasses several genres like rock, pop, and folk, and it continually cycles through and pulls from them. The term acid folk became a popular name for psychedelic folk, proving that this movement, similar to that of drugs, was founded on emotions rather than structure.
Something called like chill wave. I feel like that could be like a Xanax thing.
What kind of sound does like ayahuasca make? That's some pretty dirty burner music right there.
I've always loved the word psychedelic, but I realized at a certain point that it had certain connotations. I like to remind people of its actual meaning, which is mind manifesting.
When I think of psychedelic, I think of sort of a loosening of the rules. It's sort of like an expansion of the consciousness. You don't necessarily have to worry about what's supposed to be. It's more about what you feel in the moment.
I know a psychedelic has a weird ring to it now. You know, people are like, oh god, fucking, you know. I think my psychedelic is rooted in reality. Like singing about a transvestite is more psychedelic to me than reading lyrics about like a strawberry that ate a cat.
Music is weird. I mean, it's hard to label things psychedelic anymore. It's all pretty much trippy. You know, from a Britney Spears song to a techno song to somebody that uses too much reverb or shitty recording techniques. So.
Terence McKenna actually once said that the psychedelic experience, fundamentally, if you break down all these sort of differences and find just the similarities, that it's about boundary dissolution. And I think sex, drugs, and music really, just rock and roll, all have this aspect of boundary dissolution.
John Fahey was a folk artist who recorded songs in the early 1960s where he experimented with unusual guitar and recording techniques to present unsettling moods and dissonances, which took his music past the normal folk genre and into the psychedelic folk genre. His curiosity allowed him to push the limits folk music had to offer and open the doors to a new level of listening. With a steady decline in the church's power in the late 1950s, people began using previously forbidden hallucinogenic drugs, which created a mind-altering experience that could be enhanced by specific sounds. The inspiration for psychedelic folk is drawn from regional sounds like Hindustani medieval music, and are created mainly from folk instruments like the violin, acoustic guitar, harp, and even the sitar. The use of the sitar in regional music shows a process of globalization. Globalization is the process in which businesses and organizations develop international influences or start operating on an international scale. In music, globalization is a tool that allows us to share our cultures, thoughts, and stories with the world. Because of globalization, artists in the 60s were able to pull sounds and instruments from Hindustani music and use them to create a new genre of music. Essentially, what they created was a hybridization of a Hindustani raga, a melodic pattern combined with classic folk lyrics. Many artists such as Wendy and Bonnie pulled heavily from Hindustani music, using not only their instrumental sounds but putting emphasis on crescendos and decrescendos of the vocals. The studio effects such as the tunings and electrifications of the instruments and vocal manipulation created the mind-altering sound that was said to mimic the drug experience. The lyrics of Psychedelia aimed to connect with the natural world, beauty, love, and evoke the mental aspect of the hallucinogenic drugs. On August 15, 1969, 500,000 people waited on a dairy farm in Bethlehem, New York for a 3-day music festival to start. That music festival would later become a household name, Woodstock. Although the 60s led to the creation of psychedelic folk, the advancements of the 70s sent the genre spinning. The music began to shift from folk to rock sounds. Not all musicians made the transition, but the groups who did were known to electrify their classic sounds, and Bob Dylan played a major role in the division of the genre.
On July 25, 1965, Bob Dylan took the stage of the Newport Folk Festival toting an electric guitar in place of his normal acoustic. Through the 60s, Bob Dylan was considered one of, if not the most influential of American folk songwriters. So because of his status, this change was seen as a pivotal point in music history, where the older styles and sounds of popular music will begin to be replaced by the newer electric rock and roll sounds of the 70s. This change was welcomed by some, but for the fans of the folk genre, for whom sound and style authenticity was held in the highest regards, this transition was seen as betrayal.
Well, I wake up in the morning, fold my hands and pray for rain. I got a head full of ideas that are driving me insane. It's a shame the way she makes me scrub the floor.
Of course, for psychedelic folk, authenticity to ideals and certain styles of thinking is what made the music what it is, the music reflecting the mind. The minds of psychedelia being so abstract, out of order, and unconventional give the music its unique sound. To understand psychedelic folk music and where it comes from, it is essential to understand the minds behind the psychedelia movement, which for an outsider can be strange and difficult. Songs were even written to mock intellectuals of the time who would attempt to understand the movement using only extremely conventional trains of thought. Songs such as Bob Dylan's Ballad of a Thin Man.
You try so hard, but you don't understand what you're gonna say when you get home. Something is happening when you don't know what it is.
The icons of psychedelia lived to be freaks. They lived in a strange, acid-fueled state of mind with thoughts of breaking societal norms. Through the use of drug cocktails, irrational and unusual behavior, and ideologies based on peace and love, they sought to expand their consciousness beyond what anyone had seen before. Believing through riding the waves high, they could peer over the walls of the mind and reach a new level of peace and understanding. This is the mindset that birthed the sounds of psychedelic folk. The altered state of mind feeling the music has reflects the minds in an altered state that created it.
Although most people felt that psychedelic folk was just a fad and was created and ended with the psychedelic epidemic, this is not true. Alex Petridis, The Guardian's head rock and pop critic, writes that there's another volume to be written about psychedelics' curious afterlife. The fact that the genre, assumed to be a fad, inexorably linked with a moment in time and a fleeting burst of druggy utopianism, turned out to be anything but. Today's psychedelic folk is a mix of many different types of sounds that many of the bands believe is the proper evolution of the genre. There was never a set of instructions when creating this music, and that fact is clearly evident when looking at the bands currently playing in this genre. The bands on the fringe of the genre put more emphasis on folk's bluegrass roots. However, the more popular music in the genre embraces the psychedelic feelings with hopes to detach the listener and musician from reality by using various structures, open-ended song formats, and an incredibly interesting array of instrumentation. This idea that one way is better than the other is not true when asking those who play this music. They understand that there is no set way to play psychedelic folk, and therefore it can ebb and flow as it may. As long as the music has the intent to bring its listener out of reality, the music can be considered psychedelic folk. Tame Impala is one of the most well-known popular psychedelic folk bands currently playing. The main singer, Kevin Parker, the mastermind behind the whole band, takes a main role through the whole music-making process, thus giving the music a very personal feeling that makes it genuine and folk-like. Tame Impala is set to make it known that the band is folk, not rock.
First of all, do you consider yourself a rock and roll band?
No.
Why?
Because we're not rock and roll and we're not a band.
Their band embraces the ideas that come along with getting lost in the music and having no real instruction manual to their creating process. However, even though they seem to embrace the psychedelic folk genre, many have started to point out the difference or the evolution of the music as it emerges into popular culture. band has captured the old ways of psychedelic folk and brought it into the new generation and made it relevant within popular culture. Even though the music does sound different than those songs of the Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan, they still use the same psychedelic features that allows them to not become sellouts. They believe that this is the evolutionary track for this genre. The band's lead singer draws his inspiration from the bands he's listened to at a young age: the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and the Shadows. These are all bands that drew inspiration from psychedelic folk or inspired the creation of the genre themselves. As we have seen, Bob Dylan added the electric guitar into his music, making it very controversial. Similarly, Tame Impala has met critics over their so-called mainstream songs. Yes, some of the music includes the electric guitar and drums, but does this mean that they're all sellouts? To those who don't understand psychedelic folk, this may be the case. Yet with a deeper understanding of the music, this idea fades away. Becoming mainstream was never at the forefront of psychedelic folk musicians' minds, but they were also never opposed to becoming popular. Its original design was to get you out of your mundane life and take you on a journey. Can still be done even if the song gains popularity. Bob Dylan saw the evolution of psychedelic folk when he brought out the electric guitar. Although this caused many fans to choose sides between folk and rock, Dylan's main goal was to show that there is no set of instructions when making this type of music. Yes, there needs to be an authentic and mind-altering sound, but that can be done through many different ways. Tame Impala is merely showing current culture what it really means to be a psychedelic folk band, one where there is no set of structure or terms to agree to. They even state that they would rather not be classified as a genre because that in itself is too confining for the type of music they are trying to produce. Psychedelic folk must be listened to and understood from a perspective of psychedelics. This can be hard for many that are not associated with this culture because they cannot understand the non-structural sound that is being produced. Once people understand that the music is not trying to be anything, they can fully comprehend the sound that they hear.